My name is Noah Cates, and my presentation is on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the consumption and distribution of film. At the beginning of the year, the coronavirus dealt a massive blow to the film industry as production halted and millions of theaters closed across the world. This led to panic as production studios began questioning how to make money back on their investments. Last year, global box office revenues exceeded $40 billion to an all-time high. These revenues made up about 30% of worldwide film production and distribution, valued at $136 billion. This only digs a deeper grave for a theater industry that is already struggling. Even before lockdowns were put in place across the country, the introduction of streaming services such as Netflix, Disney Plus, and more have cost theaters millions of dollars in sales. Consumers have decided that it is often more convenient to pay a monthly subscription for access to hundreds of films rather than purchasing an individual ticket and having to drive all the way to a theater in their area. This has led to theaters across the country losing money as their frequent customers are losing interest. As you can see on the bottom graph, the average consumer's interest in the movie theater experience has been dying over the last 2 decades. In the early 2000s, the average consumer found themselves in a movie theater around 5 times per year. As the decades went by, this number has gone down dramatically, with the average customer visiting a theater just over 3 times a year in 2019. Globally, the only significant country to not experience this downward trend is China, where theater attendance has grown over 800% in the last 10 years. In addition to theater attendance, the average amount of time that a film is shown in a theater has shrunk dramatically. As you can see on the top graph, all major studios have found themselves lessening the amount of time that they show their films in theaters before releasing them to streaming and DVDs. This has also dealt a blow to the cinema industry, with blockbuster hits in theaters for only a fraction of the time that they would have been 10 to 20 years ago. At the beginning of the century, major studios kept their films in theaters for well over 5 months. Fast forward to today, where most studios barely manage to keep their films in theaters for over 3 months. Ultimately, cinemas across the world have been struggling for years, and the coronavirus pandemic will only make their fight more difficult. Unfortunately for cinemas across the United States, business is not getting much easier, as the film industry is still struggling to find a way of opening theaters while still containing the virus. As a result, we have seen almost all American theaters closed for the last 8 months. Those who have been able to reopen have suffered from tight restrictions, like no longer being able to sell concessions or limiting the amount of people in each theater. Although this helps protect Americans from the virus, theater chains have struggled to make a profit and the cinema industry has suffered greatly. Many of these chains have had to not only lay off thousands of employees, but also temporarily shut down some of their theaters. Cineworld, the second largest cinema chain and owner of Regal, had to shut down 536 theaters in the United States, as well as hundreds more in the United Kingdom, just this last month. This must feel like a punch in the gut to these companies, as their struggle has lasted much longer than these last 8 months. As you can see on the bottom graph, each of the largest cinema chains has faced downward trends in their share prices dating all the way back to 2016. However, what first felt like impending doom finally struck as the share prices for all of these chains fell from $100 in 2016 to under $25 at the end of the year. In addition to this, these same cinema chains have found their debt increasing while still not making a profit. This has led to all of their debt to earnings ratios before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization to rise drastically. AMC and IMAX have suffered the most, with each of their debt to earnings ratios rising closely to 10. In response to this, Many of the major distributors like Disney, Universal, Warner Brothers, and more have pushed back the release dates of their most anticipated films. What they hope to achieve by doing this is to hold out on releasing their films expected to make the most profit until the theaters officially reopen, especially in New York and California, where a large part of their target audience is. However, the United States has still not managed to control the virus, and cases are still increasing daily. With this information and theaters closed indefinitely across the country, distributors have needed to keep extending the delays of their films that were expected to be released this year. This forces many of these films to be postponed until 2021 at the very earliest. As you can see on the top graph, only 2 of the 40 major films set to release this year premiered on their expected dates. The rest have been pushed forward a various amount of time, mostly in the region of 6 to 12 months, with more extensions expected. Those films who have premiered this year have all struggled without their ticket sales. Tenet, a major release that was projected to win many awards, was forced into theaters by Warner Brothers with their hands tied in September. After the opening weekend, the film only made $45 million worldwide and will likely not collect a profit. With all these studios holding out to premiere their films, the theaters have been forced into a difficult situation with very little options. Many of these small to medium-sized cinemas have found themselves unable to stay afloat and have to file for bankruptcy. With very little certainty in the future of these theaters, the film industry has been completely ravished by the COVID-19 pandemic. Much like its Western neighbor, the Chinese film industry has also greatly suffered as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Unlike the United States, however, China experienced an outbreak of the virus in January. As a result, Chinese filmmakers and directors found themselves forced to withdraw their films from the annual Spring Festival among concerns of spreading the virus. At this festival, Chinese theaters released dozens of their blockbusters on the first day in order to coincide with the new year. Losing these ticket sales for the films meant a big loss for the studios, with these select films making up around 10% of annual box office revenue on average. Without any major streaming services like Netflix or Disney Plus, Chinese studios struggled to find a way of distributing these films. As you can see on the bottom graph, the use of streaming services increased greatly in Southeast Asia as a result of the pandemic. Without foreign streaming services like Netflix, China found success with local services like IQIYI and Huangxi Media. One of the most anticipated films of the year, Lost in Russia, was offered through Huangxi Media to its customers as a result of the festival cancellation. Shortly after, the CEO of Huangxi Media, Stephen Zhang, announced that the film had been watched over 180 million times on the platform, which is over 3 times as much as the tickets sold for the Spring Festival. This allowed the film industry in China to possibly even grow its audience, while also completely protecting its people from the virus. As you can see on the top graph, the box office revenue in China has increased dramatically over the last couple decades, almost even catching up to the United States before the coronavirus struck the world. Most of the credit for this is due to the construction of thousands of new theaters across the country of China, as well as the increase in quota for foreign films played within the country. Although we've seen a massive downward trend in revenue this year, it is safe to assume that we will continue to see that number rise going forward. Fortunately, the Chinese government was able to contain the virus successfully and protect its people from the virus so that they can enjoy the Spring Festival for years to come. Unfortunately for cinema enthusiasts, the future of cinema is still unknown as a result of the rampant destruction of the COVID-19 pandemic. With hundreds of theaters closing across the world, consumption through streaming has become the new normal for enjoying movies and other forms of entertainment. Many of the blockbusters expected this year will likely be released through streaming media, digging an even deeper hole for these theaters, who are now desperately grasping at straws. An uphill battle is facing these theaters, but not an impossible one. Major studios in the United States have begun to resume production while still following COVID guidelines. As expected, film as an art form will continue to thrive as long as civilization still exists. But the way that we enjoy these films is changing very quickly. Just like the hobbies of our ancestors, going to the movie theater might become a part of ancient history, and the coronavirus may just be the last nail in the coffin to do it.